So if I were giving one piece of advice for founders, it would be to keep thinking about those massive disruptive opportunities that can shape medicine if they're executed on, because those are the ones that are going to get attention. Those are the ones that are going to get investment dollars. And these incremental Me Too products and improvements, they just can't break through the noise anymore. And so keep focusing on those big bets. That said, you got to think about market access, commercial strategy, and even an M&A strategy earlier in the company's life cycle to de-risk some of those bigger bets. And so the earlier you can start to make progress on, something like a market access strategy or health economic strategy, you can do that in parallel with, actually developing the product. And, you don't wait until the FDA has approved this new transformative technology. And then all of a sudden you go, I need all this evidence to submit to payers to make sure that they pay for it.
Welcome, MedTech Gurus. Today we're joined by Mike Monovoukas, CEO and co-founder of AcuityMD, one of the fastest growing platforms helping MedTech companies commercialize with precision. Mike and his team are changing how medical devices go to market, replacing guesswork with AI-powered insights, rich industry data, and targeted workflows that help innovators find the right physicians, the right patients, and the right opportunities faster than ever. AcuityMD is in the news right now for its partnership with EPI, helping bring the AlphaStim device, a non-drug, non-invasive therapy for pain, insomnia, and anxiety, to veterans coping with these conditions. It's a powerful example of how AI-driven commercialization can help MedTech companies reach patient groups that traditional systems often overlook. Mike is here to share strategy, technology, and real-world lessons behind enabling breakthrough devices to scale, and how AI is finally helping level the playing field for underserved communities. Hey, Mike, are you ready to be our guru today?
I'll do my best, Tom. It's good to meet you. Thank you for the opportunity here.
It's great to have you. We're very excited about that. So tell us something fun or interesting about yourself or your family so we can get to know you a little better.
Yeah. Well, I live in the Boston area with my wife. We have a 2-year-old son, so he keeps us busy, and a Bernese Mountain Dog, who was our first baby here. And so we live in the Boston suburbs. I guess something fun. My whole family's in the healthcare and medical space, and growing up, and even now with my wife and I, our dinner conversations revolve around some sort of aspect of the broader healthcare or MedTech innovation space. And we brainstorm product ideas, over dinner, over barbecues. And actually my first foray into entrepreneurship was a MedTech startup that my brother and I co-founded, and learned a lot from that experience. He's now a resident in orthopedic surgery. And I continued on as an entrepreneur, in the MedTech space.
Yeah, that sounds fantastic. Certainly a lot of sounding boards to bounce some ideas off of.
Absolutely. It's great because we all have different sort of vantage points in of seeing healthcare as well. My wife worked in healthcare policy for a while, and working for insurance companies, and most recently at Amazon. So getting to see kind of first row of how the healthcare landscape is evolving with digital players starting to come in. And so it's been great seeing this evolution of the healthcare space.
Yeah, for sure. And with that, you mentioned you were an entrepreneur earlier. So tell us a little bit about AcuityMD, and specifically, what inspired you to, co-found this company? Was there a moment where you realized that medical device commercialization was broken and needed a data overhaul? Give us a little background there.
Yeah, so the first startup that I alluded to, MedTech startup, we were commercializing a product called the Wound Stylus. This is the concept my brother and I had sort of hatched over a dinner conversation. It actually got him to go and ask for a 3D printer for, I think, his birthday or Christmas one year. And so he 3D printed some of the prototypes, and, we went through some of the early company formation, processes. And, my role was to help, kind of get the word out there and enroll, physicians and do market research on the product area and the clinical area. And it was my first startup in the MedTech industry. So I didn't know anything about the clinical space that we were, focusing on, which was wound care and diabetic foot ulcers and chronic wounds. And I did a bunch of research, into that market, and sort of compiled my research. And before every sales call, I would, you know, spend hours and hours prepping for that sales call. And I remember one moment where, I had a meeting scheduled here in Boston with the head of a wound center, here. And it was what started out as a really cold interaction. Like, this person was doing someone else a favor by meeting with me, but I had done a lot of research on them and knew their kind of academic focus, knew what clinical trials they were enrolled in, knew or sponsoring, knew about what penalties they were paying. So really understood, from the ground up, what was going on there, and then tailored my product pitch to that, to those needs, and sort of turn that cold conversation to a really warm one where, the light bulb moment for me was, we have all this data accessible, increasing amounts of data becoming available in specifically healthcare data. And if there's a way that we could easily summarize and synthesize that data to understand what the end user's needs are, or what your prospects' needs and priorities are, and then tailor the products and the technologies that we sell, using that foundation, there was something there. And that was kind of the nugget that I took away from that failed first startup experience with the wound stylist, which was, there's all this information, we can harness it to build better relationships with our end users and end customers. And by doing so, we sort of democratize the way we build relationships in healthcare. Whereas, historically it's been, the folks who have, decades and decades of relationships and experience, and, have everyone in their Rolodex that they can quickly call. It makes it really difficult for newcomers to break in, and to learn about the market. And we could democratize those insights and make it easier to get up to speed in a very specific, clinical area or very specific product area. It can open the door for new innovators across the ecosystem.
Yeah, I like that, right? Because I've spent my whole career in sales myself, in MedTech sales. And there's always that challenge, right? When you get a chance to meet that provider, the pharmacist, that nurse, what have you, that surgeon, you only get a limited amount of time, right? You've got to capture their attention. Many books say within that first 30 seconds or less, right? So that important question really of, what's in it for me, if you can dial that in, you're gonna really help increase your successes. Is that kind of what you're seeing?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you know, obviously, selling to providers or clinicians or hospital administrators or hospital executives, all the folks involved with the, purchase of a piece of medical technology, they care about, very different things. And as the world of med tech sales evolves, you have to context switch and figure out the right way to engage each of those stakeholders who may care about very different things, right? And so that becomes a much more difficult ask as a med tech rep, how to constantly kind of go from persona A to persona B to persona C, and always keep your product and the differentiation and your objectives front of mind, but also being able to modulate how you communicate and what you do to get on everyone's radar, I think, is becoming more and more complex.
Yeah, for sure. So let's take a half step back, right? AcuityMD's platform really helps medtech innovators, find the right physicians, the right markets, and patient populations. So for our listeners and our gurus out there, maybe who haven't seen or heard of the platform, tell us a little bit about how it works and what makes it radically different from traditional sales intelligence out there.
Yeah, so I guess the first kind of key difference and insight for us was, we wanted to purposefully build something for med tech. I think for the longest time, the med tech industry was kind of, thought of as an offshoot of pharma, and there haven't been service providers that have in software and software providers who have like exclusively focused on the med tech industry, from the start. And I think there's like a really important unlock that provides, which is like med tech sales is just very different than other B2B sales and other consumer, B2C sales and marketing. And the traditional solutions that were built, that could help other industries don't quite fit cleanly into a medical device go-to-market motion or MedTech go-to-market motions, where you have physicians who are users of your product, but they're also training residents and fellows on the next generation of technology and procedures. Physicians might also be innovators, right? You might also be partnering with them as consultants or design partners for the next. So the relationship between a physician and a medical device company is highly nuanced. And yet, when you go and ask, med tech companies how they sort of manage the physician as a data object in their software systems, you'll hear a number of different answers. They're there are leads in our CRM or contacts in our CRM, or there are opportunities or there are accounts. But in reality, a surgeon's a surgeon, right? And ASCs, ambulatory surgery centers are ASCs, and IDNs are IDNs. These are all like very specific, objects in a med tech commercial process that don't map cleanly to other B2B industries. And so what we've built at AcuityMD is an ontology that maps, and by ontology, I mean a set of business objects and relationships across those business objects that maps to how med tech companies go to market. So as an example, a physician can operate at an ASC on 2 days of the week, only do certain procedures there based on the reimbursement. And then maybe that third day they're operating at an academic medical center down the street. And then those 2 other days are office days, right? So, or clinic days. And so that's a really complex relationship if you think about managing it from a med tech company's perspective. There are certain products that are relevant to sell that surgeon at the ASC, which might have different price points, right? Based on the contracts I have with those ASCs. Might be easier for me to get in front of the surgeon in that setting, but I might have to go through different processes to get in front of, the ASC versus an academic center where, maybe I already have some business and it's a lot easier, right? So these relationships, the ontology behind the relationship really impact how you go and sell. And so that's sort of where we started, is building this ontology specific to med tech as the best way to model and represent these various business objects for our customers. And then the second key unlock is all right, it's a really complex sale and there are all these different stakeholders and different objects with dynamics across them. But we want to make it really easy for a field-based selling organization, right? Whose, reps are on the road hours a day. They're waiting, they're in between cases, right? They're not at their computers, in an office all day. And so we want to make it really easy for them to get insights without needing to manually enter and manually record a bunch of information. And so the second unlock was being able to integrate all sorts of different data sources into this ontology, map and clean up that data into this ontology. So it created, very clear, actionable insights for the sales reps we represent. So what we do is we curate and populate this ontology with rich, real world healthcare data, covering patients in the US, about 330 million patients in the US, different facilities, their affiliations, where physicians practice, where they trained, who they trained under, et cetera, to make it really easy for these companies to get insights out of the market. And then the other unlock is we will also integrate with our customers' enterprise systems, their CRM, their sales transactions, their contract repository, and map and clean all of that data into a structured ontology that represents how they go to market. So they have the best of both worlds. They have the external kind of market data. They have their internal customer account contract data, but it finally makes sense into how they go to market based on the ontology that we've created in MedTech. So that's a high level what we do at AcuityMD.
Yeah. Thank you for that. And, as you're talking about that, and it sounds really comprehensive, right? But for our gurus out there who are listening in, many of them are entrepreneurs or soon to be entrepreneurs. So I'm curious, as you started to build AcuityMD, what were some of the early challenges that you faced? Maybe it was data complexity or adoption or integration. What were some of those challenges? And maybe more importantly, what steps did you take to solve some of those?
Yeah, I think the initial, challenge and, friction that we had is there's a lot of data. That's a lot of complexity. Like data scares, people off in a lot of ways. They've tried and spent on massive digital transformations to get their data, clean and in, a spot where they can do analytics. And even when they get there, then they, send information out to their sales reps that, they don't actually view or review or get feedback on. So the number one challenge for us was, how do we go from a data foundation and make it really, really actionable for the end user, the sales rep? And that, for us means, investing in AI centric features like our call plan feature, as an example, which, going back to that anecdote I told about the wound stylist, where I sat down to that sales call and did all that, homework. We've automated that. So in like one click now, if I'm about to go call on, Dr. Tom at, Brigham and Women's, based on what I'm selling, what products are in my bag as a sales rep, the commercial strategy we have as a company, where we have, contracts, where we don't have contracts, who we compete against, all that kind of data overlaid on Dr. Tom's data. In a click of one button, I have a printed out call plan that I can, I can use to prepare and rehearse that sales call, and I can ask follow up questions and kind of, run through what that call might look like, what, Dr. Tom might ask me back, or, what the best hook is to get his attention. And so I think like getting from data to like very actionable, useful insights for, a sales organization that has traditionally been resistant to, new things, new tools, new pieces of data, I think was the number one, opportunity for us. And really where we invested our, the majority of our product resources, like not only to have great and rich insights, but to make those so simple and easy to use that it was a no-brainer that, a sales rep would not be doing their job if they didn't, go that extra click to prepare for that call with Dr. Tom.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I mentioned in the introduction, about your partnership with EPI and the AlphaStim device, which is getting some national attention at the moment. I'm wondering, Joe, to help us out though, if you can walk us through this collaboration and the story and what some of the best practices that might assist our gurus out there. Can you provide us some insights there?
Yeah, so we've been working with EPI for a while, and they, kind of use our targeting engine, which allows sales and marketing teams to collaborate around the ideal customer profile, and then sales reps have like a very clear list and ranked list of accounts and physicians to prioritize based on that ideal customer profile and all those insights, like the call plan that I mentioned, to help them sell once they kind of converge on a prospect. So we've been working with EPI, helping their team scale, but their focus increasingly turned to the VA patient population, a huge underserved patient population where traditionally has been more of a black box for vendors to understand what happens in the VA and the volumes and the types of patients that they treat. And so we were able to sort of add VA data into our ontology, which unlocked them being able to EPI being able to execute on that strategy via AcuityMD. So it was a strategy they always wanted to pursue, but were blocked by some of the data gaps that were inherent in the market. And so instead of status quo was asking reps to find VA facilities in their territory and kind of prospect with limited information. Now they could see which VA facilities to target and focus on and why, and then which providers at those facilities are the ones treating relevant patients. And it was an expansion of our underlying market data transformed into that ontology that I spoke of, because the VA behaves in a very different way than other hospitals. And the access to data and visibility into these VA facilities is very different. So that was so in terms of best practices, they were able to take a data-driven approach to executing on this new commercial strategy, using data to guide their team's actions, and then focusing time and resources around the most impactful activities as opposed to a pound the pavement approach.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting, and what stands out with that story is kind of that precision targeting, right? I mean, it sounds like they were really zeroing in. So, how did AI in the industry data help make that possible for you and your team? Can you take us a little deeper into that?
Yeah, absolutely. So we apply AI through our data collection and curation process, our cleaning and harmonization step of the process. And then, what I spoke about earlier with the call plan and the kind of UX and how our users interact with data on the front end. And so we're constantly working to add new kind of upstream data sources like the VA, to give medtech innovators, a full picture of the market for their products. And while we know like healthcare data is very broad and scattered and messy, we can harness AI to really, distill some of the, signal in all of that noise by helping us, catch errors in upstream data, remove duplicates, flag mistakes or missing data. As an example, like we see a lot of messiness in upstream data, like an oral surgeon who is listed as doing knee replacements, which we know that is probably a gap, right? And that needs to be fixed. And so we apply all sorts of different treatments on top of the data, to clean it and curate it and put it into into an ontology that represents medtech market reality. Um, and we go further, like I mentioned also linking to customer data, and we have all sorts of algorithms that will, look at our data, look at the customer's data, and link across those two entities where, you know, previously that was a very time intensive exercise where you would hire consultants or you'd hire, third parties or even analysts or interns to kind of tick and tie, okay, Mass General Hospital in my system is MGH Inc. in this other system, and let's like make sure those are aligned. Well, we've automated a lot of that using AI and LLMs, which is, helps unlock that full picture of the market for our med tech customers, where they can say and see, well, what is my penetration for product X at Mass General? That's just a click away, as opposed to this consulting project and analytics exercise to try to piece it together.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. And Mike, you've been at this a couple of startups now, and I'm just kind of curious now, with our gurus out there that are trying to commercialize breakthrough devices. From your perspective, what are some of the biggest misconceptions innovators might have about a go-to market strategy today?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of med tech founders with technical backgrounds, medical or science backgrounds, it's easy to fall in love with a new technology and
Mhm.
focus solely on the clinical benefits. And you need to do that as part of getting through the FDA, right? That's a
Mhm.
really core part of the early innovation cycle. Um, but there is a valley of death of these innovations that, get FDA approval, but then never get, the CMS, reimbursement or payer reimbursement. And I know that there's regulation or there's some, bills in the works about bridging that gap and allowing for reimbursement, trying to tie the FDA decision with the CMS decisions. But I think that the overarching point though is you have to think about your go-to-market strategy in concert with your regulatory and clinical strategy from the very beginning. And things like market access. So, what are the health economics of this product? How is it going to make money for, the providers? Is it going to save them, time? Is like, how's it going to make money for the payers? Like understanding the actual economics of the product early, because then you can start to generate data through the regulatory process and the clinical process, that will help reinforce your ultimate pitch to payers, your ultimate pitch to VAC committees once you are approved. So the earlier you can kind of understand the market access picture, and for some companies it's like, all right, we already have a reimbursement code, we're going to fit right into that. But for other companies it's a lot more complex, so the earlier you can have a read on that, go to market strategy, the better, because you can start generating data from the very beginning and structure your tests in the market to start to prove some of that, some of the health economics out earlier.
Yeah, I like that. And you can prove it out or certainly learn if you've got a gap and adjust, right?
Definitely. And I think folks, for good reason, have focused a lot more on the clinical side. And I think we're all starting to come up to speed on, the financial and health economic side as well. And I think a lot of that thinking should be done earlier in the process.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And thinking about your organization and your company, Acuity MD, I mean, you work with hundreds of medtech teams. So I'm just kind of curious from your vantage point, are you seeing any trends or patterns that separate companies that scale successfully from those that struggle? Do you have any insights there for us?
I think the ones that, I think that we're in a very dynamic market right now. And I don't just mean the market for buying or selling medical technology. I also mean the dynamic labor market. And the companies that, succeed, or the companies that are doing well, have sort of thrown out their preconceived notion of what makes a good sales rep, and what makes, how should I sell to this prospect or buyer, and are sort of thinking those from the ground up. And the world is radically changing around us, and you, you know sales reps are expecting more to be successful, and they're finding resources. They're actually pulling information to help them be more valuable, or more impactful in their day to day. And the organizations that help enable that, as opposed to create roadblocks for that, um, are going to succeed in the future. And at the same time, the buyers are also going through a massive transformation with the adoption of AI technologies, which have, hit healthcare first. And it's been awesome to see the rapid adoption of, ambient scribing, and, some of these, answer engines for doctors and clinicians. And so I think, when your buyer is now expecting more out of the technology that they use, that's going to sort of translate into higher expectations for the service and support and insight they get from their trusted partners on the medtech side. They're going to expect a lot more out of their sales reps, right? And so I think the companies that embrace that and are open-minded about what it's going to take to compete in this next era, where, with a click of a button, a rep can create a, very personalized call plan to understand exactly where there are clinical gaps in a surgeon's practice, and how those products that they're selling relate to those clinical gaps, and economic impact, and all of the stuff we talked about with the health economic side. I think it's gonna open the door for companies to really reinvent what a sales rep supporting a prospect looks like. And so I think the companies that remain open minded to that and empower their teams to scale with data and easy to use AI products will accelerate the sales cycle.
Yeah, that's interesting. And some of the changes in the workforce that you mentioned and the market that you mentioned, in from my way of thinking, is also kind of created some marginalized groups. I think your Alpha STEM story highlights really an important theme here, right? Reaching some of these underserved or hard to reach communities. So, from your perspective, how should medtech leaders think differently about commercialization for veteran populations or rural populations? Do you have any thoughts for us there?
I think it has long been the case that, companies launching new products, new medical technologies, have focused a lot on the urban centers and the academic centers, you know, partly because, that's where the, largest teaching institutions are, might be clinical trial sites that have helped, develop the innovation. And um, I think the reality, though, is, many times disease burden is not distributed in these urban academic settings. Kind of the patient landscape looks very different than where these teaching facilities are. And so, I think what that leads to is, when sales leaders and, commercial leaders are standing up their selling organizations and figuring out where to resource sales reps, Also, the academic centers are very difficult to navigate, right? And so it takes more resource to, to serve, and they have higher expectations of their, of their sales reps. So it takes more resource to serve these academic centers for good reason. But a lot of, commercial leaders typically forget, or maybe not forget, but sort of underestimate the impact of, how much latent demand for medical technology there is across the rest of the country, in rural settings. And I think, one of the powers of the MedTech industry is that, it allows, it's sort of the tools that shape how medicine is practiced, and it makes it easier to provide higher quality care into more places. That's sort of the, one of the awesome unlocks with cutting edge medical technology is, but if they don't, if they aren't serving rural areas, or, they're not sending reps to those accounts because of preconceived notions on, how many procedures are going on, in these rural communities, then they're not able to kind of live that mission of getting access to high quality care. So I think understanding, the reality of where care is being provided and where disease burden actually is, and where, how reimbursement is flowing through the system is going to be super important to make sure that those rural communities, which can be really impactful, for sales reps to call on, are highlighted. And it doesn't just kind of go down the path of, well, the academic centers are all we know because we've served those settings for the last 20 years. We need to challenge those assumptions and help these selling organizations identify new opportunities to serve patients, across the country, not just around urban centers of excellence.
Yeah, that's helpful. And Mike, I'm also curious, you might be able to help us too, because you've had a really interesting background, right? You've worked in consulting, you did a little work in venture capital and analytics, and certainly entrepreneurship. So I'm kind of curious about how this cross-disciplinary background really shaped the way you build products now and lead teams at AcuityMD. Can you provide us some of the best practices there?
So at AcuityMD, we're a mission-driven team and company. Our mission is to accelerate adoption of medical technology. And it's a mission where we can approach a customer and they also, share that mission for their own technologies, right? So it also describes what our product does, right? At its core, we help identify, I think you said it really well, Tom, like identify new opportunities to commercialize products. And so that sort of synergy where it's an internal mission that we care about, it also describes what our product does. And it's also something that our customers, support and believe in. That helps cut through a lot of noise in, scaling organizations and keeping people, aligned to a greater North Star. And so I think that's, the number one learning I have is, when you have a very clear and, understandable mission, a lot of the other pieces will fall into part, provided that you continue hiring really great people. You hire really great people, you give them a really inspiring mission, and they will figure out how to implement and execute on it.
Yeah, I love that. And Mike, if you could give one piece of advice for founders out there, trying to scale a device from zero to national adoption, what would it be?
One of the things that really keeps me up at night, I think about some of the big sort of transformations in med tech, right? Like even the invention of the laparoscope, and all of a sudden you have a new field of minimally invasive surgery that has, kind of exploded over the last, call it 40 years, or, new specialties have been created around that technology. If that technology didn't exist, certain specialties wouldn't exist, which is kind of an inspiring impact of technology. But if that, and there are other waves as well, right? I'm just picking on the laparoscope because, it's an easy one to visualize, no pun intended.
Yeah, right.
But the what kind of keeps me up at night a little bit is if you think about how much effort had to go in to making that the new standard of care. Obviously, you needed high quality, technology to work. It needed to provide a clinical benefit. you needed to kind of influence how surgeries were done and who trained and how they were trained to influence payers, right? It's kind of this Herculean effort to shift from open surgery to minimally invasive surgery. And now everyone benefits, right? Patients benefit. Care can now be provided at different settings than before, right? Like, outpatient surgeries are a thing. Going back to that conversation about rural and, kind of off the beaten road, places of care, that is an unlock that technology helped accelerate access to. What keeps me up at night is that those transformational innovation waves are just becoming harder and harder because these stakeholders are sort of drifting, more and more misaligned. So you've got payers, providers, you've got the technology companies coming under margin pressure and, kind of falling into incremental innovations as opposed to these bigger bets that can really transform medicine. And so I know that that's like kind of a really bleak picture to paint. So if I were giving one piece of advice for founders, it would be to keep thinking about those massive disruptive opportunities that can shape medicine if they're executed on. Because those are the ones that are going to get attention. Those are the ones that are going to get investment dollars. And these incremental Me Too products and improvements, they just can't break through the noise anymore. And so keep focusing on those big bets. That said, going back to our earlier conversation, you got to think about market access, commercial strategy, and even an M&A strategy earlier in the company's life cycle to de-risk some of those bigger bets. And so the earlier you can start to make progress on, something like a market access strategy or health economic strategy, you can do that in parallel with, actually developing a product. And, you don't wait until the FDA has approved this new transformative technology. And then all of a sudden you go, oh, I need all this evidence to submit to payers to make sure that they pay for it, right? We want to do that kind of continuously through the innovation cycle. And that's how you'll get the next big wave of these transformative technologies. And it's not going to be easy, but it requires a multidisciplinary, kind of focus earlier in the life cycle of the technology, and making sure that, if you're an innovator from medicine or from technology, if that's your background, you're, augmenting and, sort of, finding resources that can help augment your skill set on the commercial and market access and go-to-market side.
Yeah, that's very helpful. So, Mike, this sounds like a really exciting time for you and your team at AcuityMD. What's the future hold? Where are you going from here?
Yeah, absolutely. So I mentioned we're a mission-driven company, and our mission is to accelerate adoption of medical technology. And when I thought about like what that mission really means, if you break it down, on one hand you have a commercial excellence side of the mission, which is effectively, for the products that are approved and out on the market, can we make sure that, they're getting to the right people as efficiently as possible, getting to the right surgeons, getting to the right facilities, et cetera. And so that's what we've been mostly marching towards with our AI platform is making it easy for sales reps and selling organizations and marketing organizations to identify those opportunities so they can be excellent with the products that they already have on the market. Mm-hmm. Then, about 6 months ago, I kind of had this, this kind of fear in the back of my mind that, well, what would happen if no new products or all the innovations were incremental and like no new massive transformative products came to market? Well, if that ended up being the case in the industry, then like we wouldn't be doing right by our mission, right? Accelerating adoption of cutting edge medical technology. There's no cutting edge medical technology coming out, then our mission is for naught. So that kind of caused me to kind of think more deeply about our mission. And the other side of that is innovation velocity. So making sure that, these massive transformative innovations are de-risked and, easier to invest in earlier. And so, we're starting to stand up efforts around that second leg, around helping MedTech innovators de-risk, the broader product development process through a set of AI and data products that can help earlier in the product development process pre-commercially. And we'll share a lot more about that when it's ready. We're in kind of early alpha testing on a suite of AI products there. But the goal would be, how do we sort of de-risk and accelerate the innovation cycle for new medical technologies using data as a foundation, of course.
Yeah, that's exciting. That'd be very helpful for a lot of innovators, and I would think a lot of healthcare systems out there as well.
Yeah, I think the best best products out there. If I think even beyond MedTech, the best products out there are ones that create demand. They create market for themselves. If you think about a company like Airbnb is a good example, right? Where the market for people who wanted to rent out or crash on someone's, airbed and, rent out someone else's apartment for a night was probably pretty small when they started. It was like a very niche market. You kind of needed to be in a certain community, in certain cities to want to do that. Fast forward to today, it's like a substitute for hotels. Everyone's doing it, right? Like families do it. Like it's just another way to, it's just massively opened the market by making it easier by, increasing the trust, right? And making it easier to kind of rent these bedrooms and rent these, apartments. And so it's created market. And I think if you think about something similar in sort of the software development space, these AI kind of coding tools, and I don't know if you've covered them in the past, but for software developers or designers or product managers, in the traditional software space, you can now spin up prototypes and with just a couple of lines of natural language and prompting with the AI agent, and that'll create a prototype that you can go and test and even launch into production. Like one of our one of our employees recently launched an internal website with a database linked up and everything with no coding experience, right? So you're creating a market for these new software products. Everyone can be a coder now to a certain extent. Now, what is the analogy in MedTech? Well, the analogy in MedTech would be, you've got, so many people, surgeons, clinicians, who observe what's going on in the operating room, are observing issues in the current state technology, are observing issues in the current state process of administering technology to the patient. What if we could unleash all of them as innovators? What if there was a way to massively expand the market for how these new product concepts originate and de-risk how they go to market over time? And that's where I would love to head, is make it much easier for an innovator to express their ideas and de-risk their ideas for other entities in the value chain, investors, strategics, to sort of play a role in furthering those concepts to market. So we should democratize innovation, make it easier for more people who have diverse perspectives on how healthcare or how surgery should be run to express those ideas in terms of new technology and innovation. And so that, your point on health systems, I think, kind of triggered me there, because I think it would be great. They observe so much about what's working and what's not working. Why not make them the next generation of innovators? They're already kind of playing that role haphazardly, right, in how they work with industry.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So, Mike, first of all, thank you so much for the time and information you provided as our guru today. If somebody wants to learn a little bit more, how do we find out more about you or your team at AcuityMD? Is there a website? Are you in LinkedIn? How do we find
our website's acutymd.com. I'm on LinkedIn, so feel free to reach out and follow us, follow me, and yeah.
That sounds great. So, Mike, once again, thank you so much for being our guru. We really appreciated your insights and information today.
Thank you, Tom. It was great to be here.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to MedTech Gurus. I am Sylvester Harris, your MC. If you want to learn more about Tom and his consulting services, you can go to www.pctmedical.com or email Tom at tom@pctmedical.com. Now, I can be reached at Sylvester Harris, that's SylvesterHarris 5048 at gmail.com. And I'd be pleased to discuss any voiceover work that you may want for your company or broadcast. Hey, thanks so much for listening, and catch us on the next episode of MedTech Gurus.